Oh, into darkness once again. Headphones, Jesus, I know words. Sunglasses. Those are the same thing.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of trickers on here. There's some people from other contracts. There's some new faces, some old ones, some known, some unknown. Well, here, where's my phone? All right. Well, you ready to start?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let me do this thing.
Yeah.
Neat. I don't need these. Anyways, yeah, dude, thanks for sitting down with me for real though.
Yeah.
I genuinely appreciate it.
Of course.
We'll start simple. Cuz like how did your journey with movement actually begin?
When I was a little kid, I took one gymnastics class when I was 4.
Okay.
And I was not thrilled about it. It felt like sadism to me. It was just like we had to do headstands against a wall for a really long time, and it hurt my head. And
Yeah.
I didn't understand the idea of drills or really any of it because it was literally one gymnastics class.
Yeah.
But from there, I did enjoy throwing myself around, so I got into martial arts, and the first martial art I did was Aikido, so there was a lot of break falls and a lot of falling, or ukemi, if you want to be pretentious these days. But there was that, and then from there, jiu-jitsu, which, again, a lot of getting thrown into the ground, so that was a thing. But then it was when I started doing karate that a lot of the other instructors at my dojo were doing, like, 540 kicks and aerials and B-twists, and this was right around 2000, 2001, so it was also when tricking was still kind of fresh and new, and
Very.
if you could do a flash kick and a D-leg, then you were a sports karate competitor.
Yeah.
So that, and then I tried to be as good as I could be at tricking for like 3 or 4 years, and then plateaued real hard while the rest of the world discovered swing throughs. I did not, and in order to continue feeling that compulsive junkie feeling of progress, I just started trying everything I possibly could so that I would always feel a sense of moving upwards instead of just, I don't know, headbutting a brick wall and stagnating.
So I'm curious, what was your first discipline that wasn't like tricking or trampoline? Like what was your first thing that was more circus that you really dabbled in?
It all kind of happened fairly simultaneously.
Okay.
I would visit Vegas, and I met friends who had friends who were in Cirque, which was this unattainable Mount Olympus to me at the time. And so I would see some of the things in shows like Chinese pole or tramp wall, and Chinese pole interested me right off the bat. And fortunately, there was a gym in town, Shine Fitness, that had a Chinese pole. So that, tramp wall. Actually, the first tramp wall I ever tried was in the space that eventually became Shine, so I guess I did that first. But aerial stuff was never really my thing, but of the aerial things, Lyra or aerial hoop was the one that I kind of resonated with, and that was just a byproduct of there was an aerial hoop hanging at the gym one day, and I was fed up of trying to do tramp wall, so I just draped myself on it and pointed my toes.
And just played.
Yeah.
How old were you when you started transitioning more from tricking into the various circus arts?
14, 15.
Okay, so that's how long after moving to the U.S. was that? Because you were born in Canada, yeah?
Yeah, I was born in Canada. I moved to America when I was 9. So, yeah, 5 to 6 years. But a weird 5 to 6 years where you go from being a kid to going through puberty to all this. So it felt like a much longer time, yeah. But really, in hindsight.
Well, and I know on top of that, you had that head injury when you were younger, yeah? Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that was, well, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Because the timing of all of it kind of just, I feel like, plays a part into it.
Yeah, it was right in the middle of that.
Yeah.
That was when I was 12, I believe. I was bouncing on my backyard trampoline. I was wearing socks, and the spring covers had all been completely eroded just from being in the sun, like us right about now.
Yeah.
And they were gone, and I just went to step off the edge of the tramp, but my sock caught on the hook of the spring, so I turned into a big human pendulum and fell with the back of my head onto the concrete patio below, and fractured my skull and probably gave myself a pretty terrible concussion. but never diagnosed because at the time it wasn't as popular of a thing to care about as it is now with the NFL and UFC and all that.
Thank you, Will Smith.
Yeah, basically. So, yeah, that did that. I'd always be curious to see how I would have turned out without the skull fracture, but in a weird way, I mean, I don't know how I thought before it necessarily, but I would be curious if the way that I've kind of explored different acrobatic things, or even just the way that my personality suited that obsessive, I'm just going to drill this until I'm dead kind of way of doing things, was at least partially stemming from that, or if it was just kind of how I was.
Yeah, because you had mentioned that it definitely had an effect on your personality. Plus, you add that in going through puberty.
Yeah.
It's what a mix.
Yeah.
What a mix.
Yeah, bad acne, plus hair about the same length as it is now, but much more unkempt, plus just not really understanding American culture, or at least Southern Californian culture, and school, and just generally feeling like an outsider. Probably was not helped by super ultra mega concussion, but here we are.
Yeah, I would say it worked out okay.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy with how life has gone now, but it took a while to get there.
Did you find a sense of community within circus when you started doing it right away? Is it something you found later? Like, how did that play a part into that?
I mean, I didn't join the circus, but I got into circus from the tricking community, because it was a few trickers who lived in Vegas and in LA to a lesser extent who had also kind of dabbled in that stuff. So there was already a bit of an inbuilt community for me in that sense, but learning new things and meeting people who were like gods to me, that was a really cool and really inspiring thing. And I always find that, generally speaking, circus people, acrobats, whether they're performing or not, are usually pretty chill people. It's usually
Agreed.
a very supportive thing. The tricking community and the tramp wall community specifically always seem to be kind of holding each other up. Tricking these days is becoming a little more commercialized, and you can see a little bit of infighting and splintering because of that, but such is life.
Right, and I think any community that gets big enough is going to have those internal squabbles. So like, in a way, it's a sign of growth. The fact that there's even those things to argue about means that it's at least growing.
Yeah.
Nothing's perfect.
Can't be gatekeeping unless there's something behind the gate, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I like that you drew the parallel between tricking and tramp wall, because I found that really early too. That the communities like felt similar in the way that they operated and the things that were kind of important. So that seemed like a pretty natural transition, because it's one that I followed as well. So hell yeah.
Boop.
And then
I feel like it's also like having done Cirque du Soleil auditions as a tramp wall performer and as a tricker. You know, I'm not saying that if it was a bigger, more kind of casting, how do I say it? If there was a larger group of people in a more established discipline, the capacity for backstabbing or cattiness is maybe going to be there just more inherently by the sheer volume of people. But with tricking and with tramp wall, every single time I've ever auditioned with that group of people, it's always been supportive. Everyone is always cheering each other on and kind of just being like, oh, what you did was sick. It's never, oh, I hate you, I want this job. And by the way, if you're trying to audition for shows, be supportive. They're trying to see if you're a good person and a team player.
No, and I think it also helps that tramp wall, at least tramp wall specifically, like it's not a solo act. Like you can only perform it in ensemble.
Yeah.
So that teamwork aspect is important from the training to the audition process to the actual performance.
That's true.
And I think that's really important too. Julian Kalari always phrased it as like the higher that each of us goes, the more ladders that we can throw down, and we kind of all get to succeed a little bit more because of that.
Definitely.
So that's always been really good. Speaking of Cirque du Soleil, like, so I know your journey into Cirque du Soleil has not exactly been linear. So how many times did you get cut from Cirque before actually landing a Cirque gig?
All of the times, except for the one where it didn't happen. I don't actually know the exact amount, but I can say that I auditioned for a solid 3 or 4 years, both as a tramp wall specialist and as a tricker. And they also tended to kind of like lump in martial arts, parkour, breakdancing, and tricking as one audition because none of those were kind of important enough to be considered their own real thing yet, which has changed, thankfully. But also at the time, parkour was like, can you do a backflip off a box onto a mat? You're a free runner. Whoa. So actually, that was how I got in. That and lying about my ability to do steer wheel. So I auditioned for Cirque as a tramp wall artist, got cut in the first round. Then the next day, as a tricker, got cut in the first round after 2 tricking passes. And then I was like, okay, well, I'll just go fuck myself. I'll be back in a year. Great. So went and trained and then submitted again the next year, got invited to come back, repeat this same process year after year after year. I auditioned for other shows in the meantime, wound up getting some smaller gigs that in some funny ways actually paid me more money to do easier. Well, I guess easier is to be expected if it's not Cirque, even though it's not really how it necessarily works. But basically, I went into other smaller gigs that then gave me the resume fodder and the performance experience to be in a better place when I would audition again. However, I was fully planning on just calling it quits and going to do stunt work instead because lucrative and lots of friends in the industry. And the day after having lunch with my friend Jeremy Marinas and talking about the prospect of me just going and doing stunt work, I got a random cold call email from Cirque Casting being like, oh, hey, Scott, we have this gig we'd like you to try out for. How do you feel about doing tricking, parkour, and steer wheel in Chris Angel Mind Freak Live? And I was just, what? Because what? And I had it in my little Cirque profile that I did steer wheel. That was a blatant lie. I had trained steer wheel in a gym like 3 times.
Oh,
I could barely waltz. I couldn't coin. I couldn't do like, I would say, and I don't mean this in any disparaging way, but my steer wheel skills were less than yours currently are. And you've just been training it
3
for
weeks.
Yeah. So yeah. So they kind of put me on the spot for that. And that was another good lesson because also one thing I didn't know, a floor like this would be great for steer wheel.
Yeah.
A Cirque stage is not great for steer wheel.
Yeah?
It's a concrete or steel stage with multiple layers of squishy paint on it. The Mystere stage, for example, has like, I want to say 90-ish layers of paint. It might be less than that, might be 70, but it's still a whole bunch of layers.
It's a big number.
Yeah, so that's very absorbent, and it does not keep spinning of its own volition like it would on a polished surface. So for this audition, I'm like, oh shit, okay, I got to learn how to do this. Did a little quick crash course of steer wheel for the week before the audition. And when I was warming up backstage behind a curtain, I'm surrounded by a bunch of equipment that I don't know what it is, but I'm sure if I run into it, it's a bad idea. It's a black stage behind a black curtain in the dark.
You're spinning.
I'm spinning, and I don't feel like I know how to do steer wheel anymore because suddenly it's glued to the floor because it's so grippy. And I'm just like, I've forgotten everything. I'm screwed. But fortunately, I went out there and faked it well enough to get the job. And then that led on to going to Beatles Love and being a trampolinist, and then also going to run ostensibly to be a stunt performer, but then breaking myself before I ever even stepped foot on stage. So who knows how that would have gone. Wouldn't have gone for very long either way because the show closed.
Oh, yeah. You told me about
at
that.
the onset of the pandemic, and that was that. But yeah, bouncy treadmills, don't do it.
Do you think that what's your idea, or what's your take on the idea of fake it till you make it? Because that comes in with this year.
Well, I mean, I think it's a good thing to certain extents.
Okay.
I would not do what I did.
Okay.
I'm glad that it worked out well for me, but I'm actually currently making a demo reel video on YouTube, and a big part of it is, hey, you should only be including skills that you can actually do. Not you can do once in every 10 attempts at the gym and then just take the best clip. Like, you can do this trick when you're exhausted, when you've done 10 shows already this week, when you've had rehearsals, you can still do it. And you can do it well enough that an audience is going to enjoy it. Not just like, I can still kind of get it around. I have known people who have faked it till they make it, but never made it as a result of all the faking it. For example, lying and saying that you've been in a company that you've never worked for.
Ooh, that's bad.
Not a good idea. Lying and saying that people who are in that company are related to you and vouch for you. Also not such a great idea. If you straight up cannot do a thing, don't say you can do the thing. I know I did that with steer wheel, but I've also seen the same thing happen with tramp wall, where people have been like, oh, yeah, I got hired for this tramp wall show. It's in 6 months. And I'm like, can you drop in? No, but I've got 6 months. 6 months go by. They didn't learn how to drop in, and they get fired on their first day. Like, you want to set a realistic expectation of your skill level, because it will backfire for you if you cannot put your money where your mouth is.
Right. I feel like you never hear the stories of that you were saying where people fake it and don't make it.
Yeah.
And so you kind of just get the confirmation bias.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the people that make it.
The survivorship is going to lead you to a little bit of a skewed view of how that actually works.
Definitely. Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
So shifting over to, we were talking about community earlier, and you are a very active participant in the community, like both online and in Vegas. Why has that always been so important to you? Like, because you give a lot to the community for free. Like your tutorials, like how many hours do you think you put into a tutorial between filming and editing and posting it?
All of them?
Just each tutorial.
Each tutorial, the least amount of time any one video has ever taken me to make was about a week. But that was, I just had an idea for a very specific small niche thing, and I was like, okay, it's going to be this. I'm going to explain it as quickly as possible. I'm going to move on with my life. That being the exception to the rule, generally speaking, each tutorial from the moment it becomes an inkling in my mind till it's posted takes usually about 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah, I do a lot of research. So I write down all the things that immediately come to mind about any given skill. I try to watch other people do it and see how their technique differs or is similar to mine. If it's a skill that has any form of twist, even if it's like a cradle or something, I try to learn it on my other side so I can be freshly terrified of it again and feel, oh yeah, this is what it's like when you're not relying on muscle memory. Because far too many tutorials of any sort on the internet are coming from the perspective of someone who knows how to do the thing in their sleep, and they're explaining what it feels like to do the thing in their sleep, but that's not what it feels like to learn anything, whether it's a language or an instrument or a trick. And with these tricks, being that they're actually physically dangerous, I think that's a very irresponsible way of trying to convey that info, of just being like, oh, here's my air flare tutorial. Step 1, put your hand on the ground. Step 2, turn your wrist. Step 3, do an air flare. Step 4, do 4 air flares. And you're just like, what? No, that's just an ego trip. That's not useful.
60-second air flare tutorial.
Seriously, I've seen it. So there's that. And then I write a script. I read it out loud. I realize that it doesn't feel as fluent or natural as it should based on what it's written as.
Right.
I rearrange it. I chop it up. I go to the gym. I realize everything I think is wrong. I delete it all. I go through this process multiple times. I film a bunch of stuff for it. I realize all that stuff was irrelevant. I delete all of it. I go back. I redo all the genuine fails and the not so genuine ones. And I usually end up doing, at minimum 2, more realistically 3 full-out recordings of the tutorial, line by line, about 10 to 15 takes per line, and then going through and I'm like, this one's good, this one's good, this one's good. It's the most obnoxious process of all time, and I hate it because I'm also the only person doing anything for it. I write the captions, I make the thumbnails. My wife showed me how, but now it's me. I edit it, I film it, I write it, I speak it.
For free.
For free. Please take lessons from me. They're not free. They could be. Yeah, but no, I mean, there were no resources when I got into this stuff. Like, I learned all the flips and stuff that started me on this journey from finding old gymnastics textbooks and capoeira textbooks, and there's like stick figure drawings in it and text explanations, and I'd go, oh, okay. There was no streaming video on the internet back in the Paleolithic era when I started doing this stuff. To download a very short clip would take a very, very long time.
Yeah.
And it would be grainy and awful. It's like filmed through a potato. So like, it's just not, it wasn't useful or conducive for learning. And you can see how all these different disciplines, whether it's free running, tricking, even tramp wall, have exploded from access to resources and understanding like, oh, this is possible. Like when I started tricking, no one had done a double cork yet.
Yeah.
Now we've got people doing quads. That's ridiculous. Like, when I started doing parkour, it was because David Bell put out a video of him jumping around on stuff. I go out and I try climbing around on rooftops, and I think I'm sick, and then I film it, and I just look like a 12-year-old boy jumping on rooftops because I was. Like, the skill level...
You gotta start somewhere, right?
You do.
Right.
I didn't go very far from there.
Okay.
But I got into Cirque du Soleil for my sweet parkour backflip off of a box onto a mat.
So you're saying there's hope?
There's always hope.
Okay.
It's not about difficulty. There's a good lesson for anyone watching. Difficulty is irrelevant. The audience has no idea what you're doing. You have to show something that looks cool. If you watch a Hollywood movie and someone gets kicked and they do a big backflip, no one in the audience is like, oh, actually, that should have been a piked half Rudy out. Like, no, just do something that looks cool. It's all about showmanship. Anyway.
Lovely.
Yeah.
What are you, so we were on the topic of community. What are things that you think that the average participant can do to help strengthen and help encourage a sense of community in whatever discipline it is?
Don't be a grumpy old man. Speaking as a grumpy old man myself, I think a lot of people have a sense of ownership of what they do, where it's like, tricking belongs to me. Tramp wall belongs to me. I was part of the generation that made it great or something like that.
I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. And I think it's bullshit. Like, I get it. I totally get the nostalgia, and I get the, this is something that means a lot to me. But don't prevent people who are up and coming from getting that same joy in their lives just because they're doing it differently than you think they should do it. Mm-hmm. Like, when I started tricking, it was for sports martial arts. It was very martial arts driven. It was called martial arts tricking. Mm-hmm. And then it became, if you're not kicking, you're not tricking. And everyone made fun of the Western Europeans for doing a lot of gainers and corks at the time, like around 2003 to 2005. That was when the French style of tricking, aka we're good at swing throughs, started to be a thing, and more twisting. And a lot of people had this big pushback on it, and hey, look at where tricking is now.
Power.
It's all about power. You've got people like Tiki and Ethan who are doing huge kicks and stuff, but it's a very different game than, here's my kicking combo. Yep. Now it's swings, front swings, all these different ways of landing and transitioning. There's a large element of gatekeeping in all these things. I think that just being an approachable person, really, on the micro scale, is the more important thing, though. If you're at a session and someone comes in, just be nice. You were there too at one point, whether you want to admit it or not. Even if you were an Olympic gymnast, you still needed to learn new things from a different community. Mm-hmm. So just be cool and be nice. That doesn't cost you anything. If someone's kind of following you around like a remora attached to you as you swim through the ocean, sometimes that can be a thing. So if that's the case, just politely and gently maybe say hey man, I'm rehearsing for a gig or something. Don't just be a douche about it. Mm-hmm. But I have definitely seen clickiness in various things, whether it's at a gathering or even just a session where there's kind of the cool kids club and then the people who want to be in the cool kids club. Very much. And then the people who don't really care either, and good for them. But yeah, if you are a member of the cool kids club, open the doors to it. Don't make it your little treehouse that no one's allowed to climb into.
It doesn't have to be private.
Yeah, exactly. It's better for everyone. It's like what you were saying with Julian. The more everyone is elevated, the better it is for everyone. If Tramp Wall were to make it into the X Games or the Olympics or something, then there's a lot of new opportunities available to anyone. Mm-hmm. That's cool. Some people might hate the idea. Some people might like the idea. But the expansion is going to happen in some capacity, whether you like it or not, especially with social media, especially with literally the Olympics reposting a junk tramp clip and all that, like Papa Roach going and hanging out and doing tramp wall. What? That's so cool.
Yeah, the exposure is definitely driving it to new audience, and new audience brings new ideas, and new ideas bring in innovation. Yep. And the thing is at the end of the day, you can't stop change and innovation, so you might as well embrace it and usher it in a positive direction regardless. Yep. Because otherwise you can't win that battle. It's like fighting the ocean. Yeah, and you're going to go down in the history of your discipline or sport as that one asshole if you do that as well. Sorry, you could be the greatest whatever in the world, but your actions will speak louder than
your achievements.
Yeah.
So
Tarnishes it. Yeah, it completely tarnishes a legacy.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the idea of like being approachable, and that kind of loops really well into the idea of reputation again. So reputation, you can have a good or a bad reputation, right? Within your sport community, big scale, small scale, with one person or with many people.
Yep.
But regardless, it's really important. And I would say that you have a very good reputation as far as being approachable and being helpful. The fact that there's people that I know that don't have any interest or know anything about circus, but they know who Scott McDonald is because they watch his tutorials and they've helped them learn a new skill, which is really awesome.
Nice.
So I was just wondering if you could speak on both the power of a positive reputation and kind of touch on the negative power that reputation can have as well. So
right.
what are some thoughts?
I mean, the entertainment industry is a very small world, and I'm going to just lump the acrobatic industry and the circus industry in with that because it's all the same thing, really. So, like, there are people who you've probably heard of as just being cool, nice people. Like, I've never heard anyone say anything bad about Pasha, for example.
Fair.
Pasha the boss. He's great. He's a really nice guy, too. Like, he's cool. A surefire way to make sure you don't get hired for things that you otherwise would get hired for based on your skill set is to be a douche. And don't be entitled. Don't do any of the things I was describing where you're just kind of being standoffish or mean. I'm not going to say if you have to, but if you have to be a douche. No, I'm not going to say it that way. Actually, that's a terrible thing to say. But, okay, if you put something on social media or the internet, it's there. It's there forever. And people will know about it. Even if you delete it, it was there. Maybe somebody screenshotted it or screen recorded it. It is known. And the people that it affected definitely know it. And they're definitely going to tell all their friends, oh my God, did you see what this one person commented on my post? Can you believe the gall this person had? And I've seen it on posts that people have made in Cirque. I've seen it in posts people have made in the gym. I've seen it when people do some brand new trick that they're really proud of and someone else kind of chops them down. Just imagine the perspective of the person that you are doing this towards. If you were up and coming and you wanted to learn something and someone just kind of shot you down, and that person is probably now not public enemy number one, but definitely someone that you're like, oh,
they're
wow,
on the list.
Yeah, I don't like you.
Yeah.
And you never know where those people are going to wind up. A lot of former performers wind up working for casting. Well, if you're one of the performers that they remember as being that one asshole, guess who never gets to work ever again?
Yeah.
It's you. People go into direction and production and things like that, wardrobe, all these different departments, coaching. Most people who are in, maybe not wardrobe, but most people who are in a lot of these other departments are former performers themselves, even in wardrobe as well. A lot of former performers. So it's like people talk, and it's a generational thing as well. I mean, the guy who is the artist coach at my show, his dad, ironically, used to own a gym that I used to train at, and I was one of the kids who would just come in and do reckless stuff and infuriate their whole family. Oops. But at the same time, it can work in the other direction. I was good friends with people who worked in casting, and one time I remember doing an audition and having to flip off of a box, and I did it like a tramp wall backflip where you come in really close, which is really scary for people who think that you're going to send it away. And fortunately, the person in casting was like, no, he knows what he's doing. That was deliberate. That's how you do it. Yeah. It's things like that. I feel that nepotism, which is just an extension of your good reputation, is more important than any skill you could have in this industry. Virtually every gig, show, performance I've ever done has been, at least in some way, a direct result of having friends. Like any random corporate gig, it's going to be, oh, hey, Scott, this is one of my friends, just texting me and being like, hey, are you available to go do, I don't know, steer wheel, poi, some aerial stuff, whatever. Like, it's always that. It's never some random person I've never heard of messaging me or emailing me. Yeah. And with Cirque, like, the more times you go and audition, even if you're not necessarily friends with them, the people who are running it will start to recognize you and know what you do and who you are. The people in the show are an invaluable resource in that regard as well. Like, yeah, just if you know everyone in the room and they don't hate you, it's much easier to get into that room.
Yeah, and I feel like that applies to just anything in life ever.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing either. Like, I feel like nepotism always has sort of a negative connotation.
A negative slant, yeah.
And it's not necessarily that. Like, if you were in charge of hiring for a thing, whether it was, I don't know, working on Wall Street or working in Cirque du Soleil, if you had 2 applicants and you knew one of them and you knew they were a good person and you didn't know the other one, but all their credentials were the same, you'd probably hire your friend.
Yeah. Yeah. I find trust is like a really big thing.
Yeah.
So if they trust you, easy. Or I've noticed that you can get trust kind of vicariously through good recommendations and people speaking on your behalf.
Yeah.
So if someone's casting and this person that they trust recommends you because they trust you, then you get some of that trust through that transaction and it works out. So I definitely feel like having like a wide network is always good, but I don't like the word network. You use the word friends, and like that's exactly how I like to approach it too. I feel like our actions in general, both positive and negative, kind of create ripples. So like if you're throwing a bunch of rocks into a pond of positivity, all these ripples go out. They start running into each other, and you get these really weird connections in the way that things interact. But also the same goes with the negativity. Like if you're always just throwing out heaps of negativity everywhere, they're gonna make waves, and eventually those waves are gonna start hitting each other, and it's gonna cause problems.
Yeah, I had fairly recently, just a friend of a friend was talking about doing a project with someone who has a very negative reputation in general, and it was one of those things where there's smoke, there tends to be fire. You know, I've never heard a single unanimous, or not unanimous, but a single clearly positive assessment of a person. You know, if you hear like, oh, they're really talented, but there's usually a reason for that, but they wouldn't include that if it was just like, oh no, like Bob's a great guy or something, you know? So
there'd be no addendum on it.
Yeah. Bob Reese is a great guy, by the way. That's a random example.
Shout out.
I didn't say Reese. Bob, whatever. Ignore that. Bob is a name.
Let's see. So, how old are you?
34.
Cool.
35 in a couple months.
Counting the days, huh?
Get off my lawn.
So just this one came from actually Christian. This was his idea. What are some things that you've done in your training and your like? How do you approach longevity? What's your mindset on longevity right now?
Should have started thinking about that before I was 30. Is my approach.
You hear that, Christian?
Yeah.
Anyways.
Okay, here's a good eye opener. I didn't think about stretching my shoulders until I tore my shoulder labrum. So, if you are worried about your future continuing for much time, words are hard. I'm just gonna say that all again. Fuck it.
Run it back.
Yeah. I didn't think about Jesus Christ. I didn't think about stretching my shoulders until I tore my shoulder labrum and it became a clear issue.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't address a situation until it becomes an emergency, and it's not necessarily too late, final, take him out behind the barn and put a bullet through his head, but like a little too late. So that's one of the things. Prehab. Actually stretch. That's something that is severely neglected by especially trickers, trampolinists, and tramp wallers.
Guilty.
Condition beyond just the demands of the thing that you do, because a lot of us will wind up with various muscular imbalances. I'm sitting here with my shoulders rounded and hunched forwards. My neck is basically a straight line at this point. Like, yeah, exactly.
Posture check.
And I mean, as much as I hate some mandatory fitness type things where it's like, okay, realistically speaking, if you're a hand balancer, you do not want to have heavy legs. There's no other way around it. Having heavy legs makes it really suck to do a one-arm handstand. It just is a thing. It even makes it suck to do big flips on the ground. Like, having big pecs is not going to make you better at doing most things other than looking cool. But like, at the same time, you want to have some form of balance to your body.
Yeah.
I think a more important thing, though, than any of the physical stuff is to treat everything as a long game and don't be impatient and don't be in a rush. Like, if you are 20, even if you're in your late 20s, you still have plenty of time. I didn't get into Cirque until I was 28, I think. I was either 27 or 28, and I already felt like I was probably over the hill. Nope. I would say the average age of most performers I've performed with is around 30.
Rad. That's actually really cool.
I've performed with people in Cirque who, as acrobats, not as clowns or anything like that, are still doing it in their early 40s. Like, I think it also depends on what you're doing. Some disciplines are way more impactful on your body than others.
Yeah, definitely.
But as long as you can maintain what you're doing and not just be crazy about it, yeah. As you get older, I think you start to be a little more cognizant of what's going to affect your body and whether or not it's worth it. I think a lot of people take less big risks as they get older, especially if their job is their paycheck.
Yeah.
Well, that's a stupid way of putting it. Everyone's job is their paycheck.
Their health.
Especially if your health and your body is your paycheck.
Yeah.
You know, you don't catch a lot of 40-year-olds being like, I need to do triple. Like, you don't have anything left to prove, really, at that point.
Yeah.
I still have a few things left to prove, but I'm trying to be very selective about the tricks I'm doing. Like, I don't know. I liked doing all my flips to my hands and things like that.
Yeah.
I kind of want to still do backflip in, back handspring out, and front flip in, front handspring out on the floor without any mats. I've done them both either to the floor without mats or from the floor to a mat. But do I, like, you know, I'm in my mid-30s, like, let someone who's 17 and just, like, full of testosterone and a need for validation go do it? Like, I'm good. It would be cool, but I'm good. I just want to do air flares, like every 6-year-old on the internet.
Hey, listen, I'm telling you, next session, that's the one.
Oh, I hope so. Yeah, I've been thinking that since like 2013. But
and I'm going to say it every day until you get it.
Please do. Can only be this far off at this point.
How much time we got, right? So like this transitions really well into the idea. You are 34. And you've been doing this for a while. Do you ever get burnout? Like moments of burnout? Let's talk about it. So, because I haven't run into it a ton yet, but I'm a year into it. You know, I got a long ways to go.
Yes. So a couple different types of burnout as well. And I think the most relevant one for people who are performing is, and we talked about this a little bit, I believe in a cycle that you go through, almost a seasonal thing where you train because you want to be good enough to get into a show. You get into a show once you have the skills. Once you're in the show, if it's an ongoing show, generally speaking, at a certain point, you will begin to plateau and even begin to stagnate. And that leads to bitterness and resentment. And depending on what your priorities are and your economic situation, you either bitterly continue to do the thing or you leave the show so that you can train and get better at things again and repeat and repeat. You put it really well, though, because I was always thinking of this as this Sisyphean just going around like a hamster wheel thing. But you were like, well, actually, it's more of an upward spiral. You know, every time you do it, you're gaining new perspectives, meeting new people, expanding your community.
You're getting better.
You're getting better.
Yeah.
It's an ascension. It's not just around and around. So that is one type of burnout. And honestly, I would say if you want to be in an ongoing show that has multiple month or even multiple year-long contracts, you got to understand that that's going to happen to some extent, and that you are not going to be able to continue just growing and progressing at the same rate because your body is now your paycheck. If you get injured, which you will at some point because risk is inherent to just learning new things, especially bigger, scarier things, then you don't get paid. So if you are more interested in the athletics and the learning, I would highly, highly recommend taking shorter seasonal contracts, whether it's at a theme park or one-off gigs. Obviously, beggars can't be choosers, and if you're first trying to get into the industry, take everything you possibly can, but be wary of longer contracts because that's where you are pretty much guaranteed to, at some point, wake up a little bit resentful. But you're not, like, a slave. You're not trapped there. You could always leave.
Right.
So then you just kind of have to decide what's more valuable to me, income or learning some new stuff.
Right.
And you can learn new things within the capacity of a show. It's just going to be different tracks, different apparatuses, but it's not like you just go to the gym and be like, bro, send it. Let's go do Russian swing. Like, no, it's not that. In terms of tricks and burnout in training, yep, totally. I find that when there's a finite resource, so since you have the Mundos sign there, for me, Woodward was always the most precious resource. I coached at Woodward West for a number of years for summer things, but I eventually had this just really good deal going where I spent most of my time training instead of coaching. That was always great for me, but I would get so much more done if I just went to Woodward for like a day, 1 or 2 days. If I had a weekend and it was like, this is your only time to be in Circus or Flippy Utopia, do the damn thing. You're so much more productive. I find that when you have infinite access to whatever you want all the time, you tend to procrastinate or just not give it your all because there's no longer this sense of urgency. You're just like, oh, like, you know, I'm at the Circus Center almost every day. Circus Center's huge. It's got everything. Like, I'm not in there like, today is the day that I need to do every single thing on my goals list because I'm never going to have access to this again until, you know, tomorrow. So that's a thing. And even within shows, the same thing kind of happens. You know, you were like, oh, when I'm on this set, I'm definitely going to do this, this, and this and get it filmed for my demo reel. And then like the week that you're about to leave the show comes up and you're like, oh, I never did any of that.
Should probably do those.
Yeah. But that's a bit of a tangent. In terms of actual burnout at the gym, the best thing I ever learned, and I wish I learned it way sooner, was to quit when you're ahead and be patient with yourself and train yourself as if you're training someone else, particularly someone that you care about and you don't want to hurt that person. Not that you want to go and hurt everyone else, but like imagine you're coaching like, I don't know, a small child with sensitive feelings. You know, you don't want to just be like, well, that was shit. Like, no, that's a terrible thing. You would never say that to a kid who just tried something and they earnestly meant to try and do it as good as they can. You wouldn't just like throw a tantrum because the kid wasn't doing the trick right. And if you do, you're a terrible coach and you should pick a different job.
Also not a great person at that point.
Yeah, you're pretty bad.
Throw that out there.
I see you, cheer world. Anyway, sorry. Anyways, different strokes for different folks. But yeah, in terms of getting burnt out, because you have an unmet expectation of I should be able to walk in and nail this trick and go on with my life because I'm the shit and I'm so good. That often doesn't happen. It leads to frustration. It leads to people having various crises and even like an existential crisis. I think so many people who are performers, trickers, whatever, if you ask them what do, they're like, I'm a tricker. So if you suddenly can't trick because you have an injury or because you just feel like you're terrible because you're not landing some goal trick you've had, that can be a really difficult thing to wrestle with. And especially if you are a performer who reaches a certain age or just level of being beaten up by life that you can no longer perform, a lot of people go through this midlife crisis.
It's an identity crisis.
Yeah, because what are you now?
Yeah.
I would say, though, I know this is really nebulous and not a clear answer, but just be patient with yourself and try and break things down if you're trying to learn something new into digestible chunks. Focus on making the one thing you're thinking about better. Let the other aspects of the thing fall by the wayside because you cannot possibly juggle 15 different details in your mind at once. No matter how smart you are, no matter how sharp you are still limited by your mind and your body.
Right.
So
And then when I coach, that's funny, that philosophy comes in when I coach. How I always describe that is one problem at a time.
Yep.
And it's that same thing applies if you're self-coaching as well.
Yep. Came to me from Brian Skinner's approach to teaching. He's a psychologist. I was reading a book about how to train puppies because I had a puppy and she's a Malamute, and those are basically like a little furry version of me where they're just like, why do you want me to do this? Are you going to give me a treat? I don't want to do this. Entice me. So having to be like, okay, we're going to break down any skill into its most simple little components. We're going to get excellent at these individual little facets of it. And then we're going to combine them in the most patient way possible. We're not going to go to the point of like, we've managed to do the skill. Now we need to do it every single time. Oh, no, it wasn't that good. We need to land on a good note, though. Try harder as you get more tired. Oh, this is more and more frustrating. I hate my life. Just break it down, make it simple. Quit while you're ahead, which is such a difficult thing to do when you feel like you're riding the wave.
Yeah.
Survive and live to fight again tomorrow. Yeah.
Take your wins. Take your wins home with you.
Yeah.
That's definitely that's a big one.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting a little tight on time here, so it's 4:47. So quick, good way to finish it off is what do you have any just like general pieces of advice from people who'd want to go from being an athlete to being a performer as someone who did very recently? What would you, some random kid comes up to you in the gym, how do I start performing? I want to do this. What are some things that you would advise them to do mindset wise, physically or otherwise?
Okay. The first thing I would say is if you were a competitive athlete in terms of being a trampolinist, a gymnast, sports acro, cheer, any of these acrobatic disciplines, remember that it's a show, not a routine. Like you want to show artistry, which there is artistry in executing really hard stuff really well, but it's a performance for an audience who doesn't understand the technical nuances of what you do. So you could do some crazy hard series of flips that other people in the community would lose their minds for. The audience cares if you can do a backflip and a handstand. If you can be in the air, do the splits. Look at the audience. They love that. It breaks the fourth wall. Holy shit, he's looking at me. I'm part of the show. And if you're making a demo, try to include as much footage from competition as you can, because when you have gym footage, it's very easy to fake your level and just be like, yeah, look at all these things that are A, probably irrelevant for a show, and B, I filmed like 20 takes and this was the one that I landed. In terms of mindset and just how to go about things, make friends with as many people in the community as possible, even if it's not the thing you're doing. Like, you know, I know plenty of aerial rope people. I don't do aerial rope. I'm terrible at that stuff. But nonetheless, having more friends will expose you to more things that you might not have considered trying or doing yourself. It'll expose you to different ways that you could use your creativity to, say, take aerial rope and tramp wall and put them together.
Right.
Or like high bar and tramp wall, like Dave Locke did for the barge thing for One Drop. That was cool. Try to be receptive to people. Generally speaking, if someone's trying to give you advice, it's not to tear you down. Some people are because they're insecure. But generally speaking, if someone's saying, hey, you should try going higher, it's because the audience is sitting really far away, and if you're doing flips really low on a trampoline, it looks like an ant crawling on a countertop, as opposed to someone doing some big dramatic cool thing that they paid $100 to see.
Right. It's not personal.
No, it's very rarely personal. And speaking of not personal, this is the big one. Everything you do in terms of getting cast for a big show, maybe not a smaller show, maybe not a show where your friends are the producers, but if it's like a big corporation or a stunt gig or something, you need to match the physical profile, and that matters so much more than the tricks you can do. And they don't tell you that when you walk into an audition. Yeah. So if you walk into an audition for a specific role in a show that already exists because you're replacing someone who has either left the show or gotten injured, you need to basically fit their costume and look like they did. There are exceptions to this, but, and this is a weird thing to say because it comes across as very bigoted and it's not necessarily the intention, but if you're the wrong gender, if you're not the same skin color, if you're a different height, if you're a different weight, you probably will not be considered, or at least you will not be considered as advantageously as someone who is. And if you think of a stunt double, this is not necessarily the right example or the same example, but if you were stunt doubling an Asian actress who is 5'4", I am probably not the person you're going to hire for that.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I'm bad at stunts. I'm just not the right for that. If you look at all my predecessors and successors in my specific role at Love, they were all 6-foot-ish, 180-pound-ish white guys. The skin tone wouldn't have mattered as much there, but still, you have to have a certain set of skills, but you also have to fit a certain physical description. They are open to changing this at times, but sometimes there's an equipment issue, you know?
Right.
You can only be a certain height to do high bar because the stage is a certain distance below it. And if you are me, then you're going to kick the stage. Too bad. You could have won the Olympics for your high bar routine. Too bad. You're not doing it. You could be too heavy for, I don't know, the strength of the bungee cords that you're bouncing on.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a far-fetched one because they'll just add more, but still, you get the idea. Like, you have to fit what the tolerance of the equipment is.
So what's the action there? Is kind of just do your research.
Yeah, I mean,
be aware, be mindful going into these things.
Yeah, and don't set your expectations for something that you won't get. I don't mean that to be like crushing anyone's dreams, but, you know, if there's a show, for example, Corteo has an act where they do a sort of pseudo tramp wall thing, but on a bed.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do that. I'm too tall. I will not fit on that bed. That's it. I would be wasting my time and my energy to be obsessively focusing on doing that. I couldn't go and do high bar for the same reason, you know?
It's useful, though. It helps you shift your aim. Like, it helps you, like, knowing that will help people understand, like, where they should really put the most effort towards and where their odds are the best, and they can help themselves a little bit more that way.
And do your research. Like, if there's a show that is existing and you would be interested in doing that show, go watch the show.
Yeah.
And if you can't go watch a show, get a YouTube version, like the YouTube video of it. Like, ask someone in the show, hey, what do you do in the show?
Yeah.
The more that you show that you've done your research and your homework, the more of a professional you appear to be. The quicker and easier and cheaper your integration would be, the more viable of a candidate you are just by default. There's a Japanese tramp wall guy right now who is posting a lot of videos of him doing specific sequences from MJ1, specific sequences from OVO.
Yep.
And I mean, he's really, really talented. Yep. I think he's going to get hired pretty much tomorrow at this rate. There just needs to be that specific profile open, you know? I don't know what height or weight he is, but I do know that they're going to be looking for someone of a similar size to replace at some point. So, yeah.
Dude, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.
Sorry for my very damaged brain meandering in weird little circuitous ways, but
and I want to give you the opportunity to plug this really quick. You want to talk about your medical conference? And encourage people to come to that? All right, listen up really quick.
So I will say it's not public, but there will be a publicly viewable live stream run by this guy and hopefully a recording of it that people can watch after the fact. But I am co-hosting a medical conference with the subject of circus meets medicine at the Las Vegas Circus Center, March 14th, 2023. We're going to be addressing basically injuries in the circus industry and how there is occasionally a miscommunication between the performers and the medical side of things, and vice versa. Sometimes doctors don't know that a Russian swing is not the same thing as a swing set at a playground.
That one comes from experience.
That one does come from experience, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
You know, just trying to basically improve the communication between performers and the medical side of things, see what we're currently doing, what could be improved to give better treatment. Because circus performers, you get a lot of former world champions, a lot of former Olympians, and unlike, say, the NFL, UFC, really any major professional sports organizations, we don't really get that kind of specialized medical treatment or even understanding of what we do. And, you know, you can think what you want about that, but nonetheless, it would be great if we could improve it. So, yeah. Come check it out. Circus Meets Medicine, March 14th, Pi Day at the Las Vegas Circus Center.
Tune in. I'm sure he'll have all the updates on his social media. You can follow him at Scott McDonald. Yeah. If you don't already, what are you doing? But yeah, either way, that's the best place to find info on it. Thank you so much, dude.
Thank you.
Whoop. All right, and
bye. Goodbye. Nice.
They can still hear us.
Nice.